If you're the kind of person who throws away a lot of food because it goes bad before you can use it up, stick around. I've got some tips and some specific recipes and ways of using up commonly wasted ingredients. I'm talking salad mix, I'm talking cucumbers, I'm talking fresh fruit, milk. Let's all learn something. This is actually part 2 to a video that I'm doing on food waste, so watch part 1 there. I'll leave a link in the video description as well. Part 1, I talk about more like global tips, like general strategies that you can employ to not waste food as much and save a lot of money and help the planet in the process. In part 2, I asked the community, so my followers on this YouTube channel and on my social medias, I asked them, what are the kinds of foods that you waste? And I'm taking all of your answers and I'm telling you the kinds of things that I do to prevent myself from wasting those ingredients. I am just one person and this is just my experience, so I do not have all of the answers. So I actually very highly encourage you all watching to leave some comments for the ways that you do not waste these items, or ways that you use up other kinds of ingredients that tend to go bad. So 46 people responded to my questions on this community tab and on Twitter and Facebook. But this is by no means a scientific survey. I actually, in the prompt, I included, hey, do you waste salad mix? Do you waste fruit? So those ideas were imprinted into people's minds when they answered, and people were able to see each other's comments when they answered. So their answers were influenced by other people. So it is definitely not scientific, but it's still a pretty decent indicator of the kinds of foods that my community and probably people in my country, the US, tend to waste. So 27 people responded that fresh salad ingredients go to waste, things like lettuce and mixed greens, cucumbers, and avocados. 12 people answered that fresh fruit, especially berries and bananas, tend to go bad. 8 people answered that, I'm just calling this miscellaneous veggies that you might cook, go bad, and especially zucchini was one of the veggies that goes bad. 6 people said leftovers. 5 people said cold cuts. I kind of found that interesting because in my mind, cold cuts, because they have nitrates and other preservatives in them, they tend to have a very long shelf life in your fridge. But maybe these people are getting like natural cold cuts or something, or they're just keeping them that long in the fridge and they go bad. I actually have been there. I've done that. 5 people said that milk goes bad. 4 people answered, I'm going to call this snack dairy. So things like yogurt, cottage cheese, and cheese go bad. 3 people said bread. 2 people, so these are not very many people, but I'm still including them anyway. 2 people said, I'm calling this hearty veggies stored badly. So people answered things like potatoes or garlic or whatever go bad. These are root veggies and they tend to last a very, very long time if stored properly. So they might just be either you bought them very old or you're storing them incorrectly. 2 people said cooked rice goes bad on them. 2 people said stale snack foods. So, you buy a bag of potato chips and you eat half of it and then you forget about it and it goes bad. This happens to my husband a lot and it really annoys me because he's not as dedicated to mitigating food waste as I am. And 1 person answered that eggs go bad, and that is indeed a tragedy in today's economy when eggs are very expensive. So now I'm going to go over some of my tips for using up these specific ingredients before they go bad. So for fresh salad ingredients, things like lettuce, cucumbers, and avocado, this first tip that I'm going to say will apply to pretty much everything. So when you learned about recycling, especially in my country, you might have learned like the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. It's actually 5 R's. And the first item is refuse. That means don't even buy the thing in the first place. It's like, how can you waste something if you didn't even buy it? So yeah, if you notice that like you're buying salad mix and the whole bag just goes bad in your fridge, just if that happens to you frequently, ask yourself, do I just not like salad? Am I just not the kind of person that wants to eat salad? Just don't buy it in the first place. Buy something else. Buy mixed frozen veggies instead if you want to be healthy. This tip only really works if you have money and a car, but if you buy your veggies at the farmer's market, they tend to last a lot longer because they tend to be a lot fresher. In the summertime, I like going to my local farmer's market, and sometimes I get lettuce from this farmer. We call him the school bus farmer because they sell out of a school bus. They have amazing lettuces. They have this like Boston oak leaf lettuce hybrid that I love. And I can buy a giant head of that stuff, and they sell them in giant heads. And it lasts 2 weeks in my fridge, because it's very, very, very fresh. And this is true of all veggies at the farmer's market. They will last much longer. However, a lot of farmers markets, depending on where you live, they tend to be more expensive, so this isn't necessarily attainable for people on lower income households. If you are lucky enough to live in a house and you have the ability to compost, just compost the veggies in the salad mix that goes bad, because at least that way you're turning it into nutrient-rich soil, which you can then use to grow yourself some food that you can eat. That way you're at least kind of keeping it in the system and turning it into more food instead of putting it in the dumpster where it'll be bad for the environment. My other tip is if you ever get any kind of salad green, any kind of really fresh veggie, cucumber, tomato, avocado, salad greens, eat it like the day you buy it, or like make a plan to eat it within the first days after you buy it. My first video, I touched upon this. Make a plan your meals, and like write down in your schedule, I'm gonna eat salad on Tuesday so that my salad mix won't go bad. So here are some tips specifically for salad greens. The first tip that I have is instead of buying lettuce, which goes bad quickly and you cannot freeze lettuce really, you can't really cook lettuce, so you can't use it in other ways other than salad. Instead of getting lettuce, get other greens that are hardier, sturdier, and that you can cook and freeze. So I'm talking greens like cabbage or spinach or kale. These also tend to be more nutrient dense than lettuce, so win-win. But yeah, if you find that you're buying a lot of lettuce for your salads and it just goes bad on you, buy those other greens instead, because even if you can't use them on time, you can freeze them. And I have a video actually for blanching and freezing spinach for later use. It's a very short video, go watch it. And see, you can't freeze lettuce, so that's again why I'm recommending you buy veggies that you can freeze, like cabbage and spinach. My next tip is somewhat controversial because it's not necessarily the best for the environment, but it's something that we do. Buy living lettuce. They sell it in hard plastic containers, and it has like the root ball with some dirt attached to it. They last like up to 2 weeks. I buy our butter lettuce that way. Mostly I buy it that way because that's the only way I've seen it available in the grocery store is sold like that. But it really does last a lot longer and we don't throw it away that way. But again, that's a little bit of a controversial tip because if you really care about the environment, like you shouldn't be buying like harder plastic like that. My next tip on lettuce is see if your grocery store, a lot of them have this. Instead of buying it in the bags where it's like pre-measured out into the bags and sealed, you might have a loose bulk section. That way you can use some tongs and you grip the little bits of the salad mix and put it in a produce bag. That way you can get just a handful. Like if you only want one salad, you don't have to buy a whole bag of the mix. Use a handful of it and then the rest of it turns to sludge into your fridge. The loose salad mix also tends to be a little fresher than the pre-bagged stuff. So win-win. For cucumbers, okay, my main tip of getting rid of old cucumbers, I often have extra bits of cucumber lying around my apartment. I just eat them. Like I used to, when I was in high school, story time, I didn't understand how calories worked. I didn't realize that like a cucumber is really not that much food at all. It's like 50 calories maybe. Like to me, I'm like, oh, it's bulk in my stomach, so it's food. And I would eat literally just a cucumber every day for lunch. I mean, I would eat way more food than that throughout the day. I'd like come home from school and then eat a giant loaded salad full of like cheese and croutons, and then I'd eat like 2 baked chicken thighs and a bunch of rice and peas for dinner and stuff. So it's not like I was starving myself, but yeah, I would eat just literally a cucumber for lunch in high school. And yeah, I think they're delicious to just eat, to just snack on. Also, you can make cucumber water with extra cucumber. Just slice them and leave them in water, and it's nice and refreshing. You can also pickle them. Now, I mean, it's better if you pickle pickling cucumbers, or if you get those little tinier cucumbers, like the Mediterranean ones, the English cucumbers, or the Japanese cucumbers. Those tend to pickle a little bit better than like the big, thick American, like salad cucumbers. But you can pickle them, and they will last a lot longer if you do that. I have a video for that as well. It's quite old, and the sound quality and lighting is terrible, but go watch it, I guess. And I have another video that's an older video, but it's still a good one for cold cucumber avocado soup. So this ticks off 2 items that people say they waste, cucumbers and avocados. If you puree cucumber and avocado with some milk or yogurt or chicken broth, you can make a nice like cold cucumber avocado soup. It's great for the summertime. For avocados, that's just one of those things, it's a gamble. You really have to commit to like pay attention to that avocado so it won't go bad and you won't wind up throwing it away. And yeah, I say avocado and not avocados because you're a lot more likely to be successful in eating the avocado before it goes bad if there's only one of them. Whereas if you get a lot of them, it can be tempting to get multiple avocados because you see them in the bag and you just grab it and go. But like if you buy more than one avocado, they tend to go bad. I found that if you wait for the avocado to get ripe on your countertop and then you put it in the fridge after it's gotten ripe, it'll last a good 2 to 3 days. So if you have 3 avocados and they all get ripe at the same time and you want to like space them out, you can put the other 2 in the fridge and then take them out as you're ready to use them, and they will last a little longer. Failing that, if you have extra avocado, you can cut it up and freeze it, and some people put that in smoothies. But yeah, what I usually do is I refuse. I only buy like 1 avocado instead of like 3, and I make a plan to use that avocado, and I like hover over the avocado, and I like move all the other things I'm planning on eating aside, and like, okay, when that avocado is ripe, I'm eating it. Because yeah, avocados are very hard. For fresh fruit, now this is something that is very sad to waste because it's expensive, man. It's very expensive. So my first tip for fruit is, once again, refuse. Just don't buy fresh fruit in the first place. If you're the type of person who buys fresh fruit because you like snacking on it as a healthy snack, consider getting dried fruit. And you can get this in the bulk section of places like Sprouts, or Winco is usually where I get mine, but other like Kroger related stores like Fred Meyer, I think, also have bulk sections, or you can get just 1 dried peach to test it to see if you like it, and then you can get more. But yeah, dried fruit will last a long, long time in your pantry, and you can snack on it. And it's nicer than fresh fruit because it's portable as well. Like if you put a banana in your purse, sometimes it can get all smushed by the time you get to work. But if you pack banana chips instead, they're fine. I mean, I guess they might break into little pieces, but they're fine. And also consider getting frozen fruit instead of fresh fruit, especially if you are a smoothie person. I prefer frozen over fresh because that way, instead of doing fresh fruit and ice cubes with water down your smoothie, just use frozen fruit. It serves as both fruit and ice. It's cheaper and it tends to actually be tastier a lot of the time, and you won't let it go to waste. I'm actually putting no farmer's market fruit. If you do get farmer's market fruit, because it's fresher, it tends to be picked when it's like ripe instead of picked green like supermarket fruit is. It tends to have a much shorter shelf life. So if you do get farmer's market fruit, like eat it the day you get it. Also, you can compost your fruit if you're lucky enough to be able to do that. Another thing that I do with excess fresh fruit, like despite all my best planning and intentions, I'm left with some, more fresh fruit than I can eat. I freeze the excess and then I turn it into smoothies later, or I turn the excess into jam. And I have videos for both of those things. So those are some general good tips for like extra berries that you might have. A lot of people talk about buying fresh berries and then they go bad, which is really sad because fresh berries are really expensive in particular. So yeah, buy them frozen. For bananas, you can actually buy less than what is on the bunch. I've done this before. I don't know, maybe it's frowned upon to do this, but like if I see a bunch of 5 bananas in all the bunches and I only want 2, you can just like pick off 2 bananas off the bunch and buy just that, assuming it's like price per pound and not price per like bunch of bananas. You can just do that. Also, if I have extra bananas, I just pop them whole into the freezer. It works a little better if you cut them up, put the fruit on like a cookie sheet in the freezer so that it freezes separately, and then put that into a freezer bag. But I just chuck the whole banana into the freezer and then I cut the peel off. You can actually, I learned this recently, you can run it under hot water on the sink for a little bit and that will soften the peel, and it's much easier to take off the peel that way of a frozen banana. But yeah, you can make smoothies out of that, and I have a video of that as well. And whenever you're using your freezer to preserve fruit to make sure that it doesn't go bad and stuff, keep track of it, like label it or make a list or keep a note to yourself to know, okay, well, my bananas have been in the freezer for 2 months now, I better use them. Otherwise, it's pretty easy to lose track of things if you keep them in the freezer and just forget about them. So keep a list. For miscellaneous veggies, especially zucchini, for some reason, once again, refuse. Do not buy fresh veggies. Buy frozen, buy canned. They will last forever, almost. And you can use just as much as you need. If you need a cup of broccoli florets to make beef and broccoli, instead of buying fresh broccoli where you don't know how much you're actually getting and you usually wind up with extra, just buy frozen. And then you can use exactly a cup, put the rest back in the freezer for the next time you want to make beef and broccoli, and you're good. Once again, if you get your fresh veggies at the farmer's market, if you have a little money to spend at the farmer's market, they will last longer because they're picked fresher. Once again, compost if you have the ability to do that. And another one, don't buy prepackaged if you can avoid it, because like the pre-cut broccoli florets, for example, they're not going to last as long as a whole thing of broccoli. Once you break down a fruit or a vegetable and cut it into smaller pieces, it will degrade. It will go bad so much faster than if the whole thing is kept intact. If you have extra veggies, you can just freeze them. Like, you don't even have to be fancy about it. You can literally just take your extra broccoli florets, pop them into a freezer bag, and just chuck them in the freezer for later. You can also, I've kind of recently gotten into this, and you don't need to have a food dehydrator to do this, but you can dehydrate things as well. I've gotten into recently dehydrating extra herbs that I have. That's like the one thing that I'm able to grow on my like 3-foot by 3-foot slab of concrete at my apartment is some herbs. I almost always have some extra, so I turn my oven to its lowest setting and I put the herbs on a cookie sheet and I dry them out in the oven. So I don't even have a food dehydrator, and you can still dry. I also sometimes dry herbs by tying them together in a bunch and hanging them upside down somewhere, and they'll dry naturally. But if you have a food dehydrator, like totally dry stuff. And also miscellaneous veggies, I find these are perfect candidates to improvise meals out of. And this is another instance where I think people need to learn more techniques and less like cooking to recipes specifically. So some of my favorite things to do to use up old veggies are to make pasta, fried rice, or like Asian style stir-fry noodles, or to make a soup. And I have videos for all of those things in the video description, so check those out if you want to learn how to kind of improvise those things. It's very basic. You can just take olive oil and maybe a little garlic and veggie of your choice, whatever veggie you happen to have in your fridge. Saute that while you're boiling some pasta, dump the cooked pasta into the sauteed veggie and olive oil, stir it around with some pasta water, and bam, you have food. Like, it's great. And you can do this with leftover frozen veggies as well. For fried rice, this ticks off 2 things in one, because some people complained about leftover rice. Well, you got leftover rice, you got leftover extra veggies in your fridge or freezer, make fried rice. Put some oil in a pan, saute it with maybe some garlic and some ginger, saute some veggies, whatever ones you happen to have, maybe add egg if you have it, maybe add leftover meat if you have it, and add your leftover rice, stir it around with some soy sauce and or some oyster sauce and or some sesame oil, and you got fried rice. And it's a great way to clean out your fridge. Another thing that I love doing and that I've come to love doing recently is to make a cream of vegetable soup. Brian Lagerstrom, this YouTuber I really like, has a blueprint for that. It works with just about any veggie. You combine it with broth and sometimes with dairy, which is another thing that people say they have extra things of that they have a hard time getting rid of. And you simmer that and puree it, and boom, you have soup. So there's a lot of ways you can repurpose these extra ingredients pretty easily. And if you don't have the time to do it at the moment, you can freeze the vegetables for later. If you have a hard time just getting rid of leftovers, I mentioned this in part 1, but get into the habit of giving away food to people. Do you have friends? Do you have coworkers? Do you have a homeless person who lives in your community who could really use the leftovers? Do you know teenagers? Do any of your friends have kids? They sometimes will just eat it if you have leftovers. I also talked in my last video about repurposing leftovers. You can Google, how do I turn leftover mashed potatoes into something else? How do I turn leftover pasta into something else? How do I turn leftover rice into something else? And you'll find all kinds of recipes. So your knee-jerk reaction might be, oh, I have this leftover ingredient, I have no use for it, I'm going to throw it away, but look up something. You'll probably find a way of using it. So for cold cuts, again, I was kind of surprised that people were saying that they were having a hard time using up their cold cuts. If you buy your cold cuts at the actual deli section of the grocery store, not pre-packaged in the sealed, plastic where like the cheese and all those things are in the refrigerator section, but if you go to the counter where there are people working behind the counter who will serve you and get the deli meat that way, you can get like a smaller amount of it. You don't have to get like a whole pound or 2-pound package of it like you would have to do if you buy it pre-packaged. You can instead like say, hey, I only want like 3 ounces of roast beef for my one sandwich that I'm going to make. But you can also freeze, believe it or not, lunch meats. They're not that great necessarily if you freeze them and then defrost them and then use them on sandwiches as is, but you can repurpose them. You can use them as pizza toppings, or you can use them in quesadillas or other things like that. Or you can use them on hot sandwiches. Just put it on, make your sandwich as usual, but put it in the oven or the toaster oven or an air fryer to melt the cheese and kind of crisp up the lunch meat a little bit. But yeah, you can freeze it. I would just say freeze your excess or buy less of it in the first place by buying it at a deli counter instead of prepackaged. For milk going bad on you, this is a very sad occurrence. This never used to happen to me because I used to be one of those white people who would drink 2 whole gallons of milk per week. But now I don't drink as much milk, so I have had to find some strategies to deal with this. So one tip you can do is just keep your milk towards the back of the fridge because it's colder, so it'll last longer there. Ignore the sell-by date. Use your nose and your taste buds instead. I have drunk milk past the sell-by date. I've drunk milk past the expiration date, and it's been fine. Sometimes I've drank milk before the expiration date and it's not been fine, and probably because I was keeping it too far towards the front of my fridge. But yeah, keep it towards the back of the fridge and use your nose and your taste buds to make sure that it's still good. Buy less of it if you can. I know it's hard because it's so much cheaper if you buy it in the bigger containers, but like if you're finding that consistently you just don't use milk often enough before it goes bad, buy less of it. Embrace it. Embrace the fact that you just don't drink much milk and buy less of it. You know, buy it in the smaller containers. Another thing that you can do, milk does freeze, and there's an asterisk after that. My grandma used to freeze her milk and then defrost it and then feed it to us as is as a drink and thought we wouldn't notice. We noticed. It tastes nasty. But what you can do with frozen milk, what I usually do with frozen milk is I turn it into ricotta or paneer. And I have a recipe for pollock paneer on this channel where I make my own paneer with milk. And that's pretty much always what I do now with frozen milk is I use it to make paneer. Or if you're a baker, it works really great in things like cake or bread or tortillas or stuff like that. I've got some buttermilk in my freezer right now, for example, that I'm saving for the next time I want to make cornbread. Another thing you might want to consider is to buy powdered or dried milk instead. And I actually, not instead, but in addition to fresh milk, I also have canned and powdered milk. Sometimes, you know, if you only want just a little tiny bit of milk, maybe to make your oatmeal in the morning or something, maybe you can use powdered milk. That lasts forever in your pantry. Maybe you can use canned milk. It comes in much smaller cans, so it's easier to use it up. You can also use excess milk if you have frozen fruit to make a smoothie. It's a very easy way to get rid of milk and fruit at the same time. So for snack dairy, cheese, cottage cheese, yogurt, once again, keep it towards the back of the fridge so that it will last longer. Ignore the sell-by date. Use your nose, use your taste buds. For yogurt, buy less if you can. If you're noticing that you're consistently throwing away yogurt, just buy it in smaller containers if possible. Use it in smoothies. I recently did a video on this channel. It's incredibly simple, but I made a video anyway where I made a smoothie with yogurt. That's often how I use up any extra yogurt that I happen to have lying around. You can use it with plain yogurt, you can use it with flavored yogurt as well, so it's great all purpose. If you have excess plain yogurt and you want to eat it, but you don't like plain yogurt, mix it with jam, with fruit jam, and boom, you've got flavored yogurt. You can also freeze yogurt. Again, it's not going to be so tasty to just defrost it and eat it as is, but you can use it in smoothies or you can use it in baking. If you have a recipe that requires buttermilk, for example, you can just use yogurt instead of buttermilk. So for things like bread or cornbread. For cottage cheese, once again, if you can possibly do this, buy less, buy it in a smaller container. I know it's going to be more expensive per ounce, but you're not going to throw it away. You can freeze cottage cheese and kind of repurpose it. If you put it in something where you cook it, it's not going to be so gross. So you can use it in lasagna or mac and cheese. And then recently I saw, it showed up on my recommendations, Emmy made cottage cheese ice cream. It's apparently a TikTok thing right now. She said it didn't really taste like ice cream, but it still tasted good in its own right. So try making cottage cheese ice cream. Cheese, you can freeze cheese. Like, not all cheeses are the best frozen, but generally, yeah, you can freeze cheese and defrost it in your fridge, and it's pretty much just like normal cheese. For bread, I know there's this big debate. Oh, do you keep it on the counter or do you keep it in the fridge? If you want your bread to not go bad, keep it in the fridge. Even if you bought it at the store and it has preservatives and stuff in it, it will last longer in the fridge. Yes, it might get a little stale, but if you're going to toast it anyway, it doesn't really matter. You can also keep it in the freezer. I know a lot of people with ADHD like to do this because, you know, they tend to forget that their bread is going bad, but if they just keep it in the freezer, it's always there for them. It never goes bad. And if you always eat your bread toasted anyway, it doesn't really matter if it's previously frozen. You can also repurpose your bread. You can turn it into breadcrumbs. You can turn it into bread pudding. Bread pudding's my favorite way to repurpose old bread. But yeah, I usually freeze it until I can use it later. Like, I almost always at any given time have some frozen burger buns because they always come in packs of 8, but I usually only make like 2 or 3 burgers at a time. So I'll always freeze the rest. And yeah, I toast them, so it doesn't really matter that they're previously frozen. For hearty veggies, I mentioned at the beginning of the video, people are saying garlic is going bad on them and stuff like that. You might just not be storing them properly. Like, look up on the internet how to store these things properly. With most veggies, you want a little bit of moisture, but not too much moisture. So I usually like to keep things in produce plastic bags, the kind you get at the grocery store, loosely. Like, I don't tie them tight and then I keep them in the fridge. That keeps enough moisture in to keep them fresh, but it lets some of that excess moisture evaporate. I also sometimes put a paper towel in there to soak up any excess moisture. But yeah, just look it up. How do I store potatoes? How do I store carrots? How do I store garlic? And you'll find ways of storing them. For leftover cooked rice, you can freeze it for later. You can freeze almost everything. Embrace freezing it. You can also make fried rice. I got a video for that. And you can also make rice pudding. I got a video for that. Or you can make congee. There are lots of recipes out there for repurposing leftover rice. And you can also just eat it. Like, I often like eating rice with peas and butter, and to me that's a complete meal. It's a complete protein. For stale snack food going bad on you, buy it in smaller bags. It's healthier for you anyway. Keep snacks visible and within reach so you don't forget about them. My husband does this trick a lot. He'll just keep the snacks next to him on the bed, and that way you won't forget about it. If you keep it in the pantry or the cabinet where it belongs, you're more likely to forget about it, so just keep it out with you. Only open one bag at a time. Like if you buy 3 different snacks, you've got like some cookies and you've got some potato chips and you've got some tortilla chips. It's tempting to have all 3 of them going at once so you have a variety, but only resist that temptation and only do one bag at a time. And also get into the habit of using bag clip things and like using rubber bands to close the bags. It's amazing how much fresher your snacks will stay if you just like close them into a bag so that they can't get air and moisture in there. You can also repurpose some chips to an extent. Again, go on the internet and look for recipes for, you can use crackers in casseroles. I used to make this all the time when I used to snack on tortilla chips. There's like I call it a Mexican lasagna, or some people call it a Frito pie, I think, where you like layer tortilla chips with tomato sauce and other veggies. I usually put in there maybe leftover meat and cheese. It's a great way of getting rid of a lot of leftover ingredients, frankly. There's also potato chip casseroles, so you can repurpose those like stale chips into casseroles as well. For eggs, again, I was surprised that somebody was saying eggs go bad. Ignore the sell-by date. Eggs last a very long time. Eggs last longer than a month for me in my fridge. There's a test where if you spin the egg and it stays in place on your countertop, it's still good. There's also a dropping it in water test to tell if it's good or not. So do those tests to tell if your eggs are okay to eat instead of the sell-by date on the carton, because again, you can kind of ignore those sell-by dates. See the Climate Town video. He explains it really nicely. You can also freeze eggs. You can freeze everything just about, but yeah, you can freeze eggs. I also know people who freeze like egg whites and stuff. If you're a baker and like me and most of your recipes use egg yolks but not whites, you can freeze them for later. You can put them in like ice cube trays, and that way they'll freeze individually, and then you pop them out once they're frozen and put them in a Ziploc freezer bag, and then you got frozen eggs. And they actually freeze quite well, and you can use them just like you'd use fresh eggs. Also, the other dreaded piece of advice, just buy less. I know you save money if you buy more of something, but if you're throwing away half of it, you're really not saving that money, are ya? Okay, so those were all my tips for these things. Again, if you have other tips of your own that I did not cover, because I did not cover by any means all the tips, leave them in the comment section below. And check out the video description for a bunch of links to actual recipes where I show these principles in action. Thank you to my patrons for making this and other videos on this channel possible, especially Britt, Honey Badgers, Megan M, Matthew, Jenny D, Jocelyn, Gina F, Megan B, Data Fox, Gina S, Ruth, Katie, Lonesome Screams, Mihir, Morgan, Beat Vavo, Britta, Veda, Anna, and Aditya.